and welcome to the channel. Today is the second part of how to train a candidate video, and I gathered all the science cues you'd probably need in your training. Mainly, today we'll talk about how the hormones work, the genetic reality, and what everybody misses about the supplements and the technique, as well as how to break your plateau, how you break nutrition advices, and the myth popular in the field. And finally, how to integrate everything we mentioned in the previous video on this one in your training protocol. Let's start from the hormonal optimization. Your underground engine mainly is the testosterone, the growth hormone, and the insulin growth factor. They form the anabolic trinity that drives your muscle development. Well, surely you cannot dramatically alter your natural production of them without some pharmaceutical influence, but the research consistently shows that your training and your lifestyle factors can optimize your natural hormone profile within genetic limits. Talking about testosterone, research shows that compound movements like squats and deadlifts can produce greater acute testosterone levels than the isolation exercises. Also, training sessions under 16 minutes show a bit better hormonal response compared to the longer ones, probably because of the reduced cortisol action. The growth hormone is always at its peak during the sleep and immediately post exercises. Actually, both high-intensity training and resistance training stimulate the growth hormone release, but the magnitude depends on training volume and intensity. Interestingly, intermittent fasting can increase baseline growth hormone up to 1500-2000, but for the muscle building, implications remain unclear. So what should you actually do to improve your hormonal profile? Mainly, you should keep your fat between 10 and 15% for the optimal hormone production. Consume adequate dietary fat up to 0.3 gram per pound of your body weight, and minimize your chronic stress because your cortisol response antagonizes every anabolic effect. Also, don't forget about your sleep quality, because mainly the growth hormone window is primarily activated during your sleep. And consider some supplements like vitamin D3. Next point is the information. Information gets a bad reputation, but it's kind of essential for muscle growth when properly managed. Research shows that acute inflammatory responses following resistance training trigger ultimate cell activation and produce protein stasis. On the other hand, the chronic inflammation impairs the same processes and promotes muscle breakdown. The main distinction is between the transient inflammation signaling and chronic inflammation burdens, because post-exercise elevation of your inflammatory markers like IL-6 or TNF-alpha appears necessary for optimal adaptation, but if you have these levels consistently high, it can indicate overtraining or poor recovery. To manage this inflammatory balance, you should allow yourself from 48 to 72 hours between really hard session for the same muscle groups. Also, you can consider some anti-inflammatory nutrients like omega-3 or polyphenols chronically, not acutely around training, and avoid the excessive use of anti-inflammation drugs because it can impair the muscle protein synthesis. Everything else is mostly the same. Just monitor your sleep quality, HRE, and your fatigue. Address chronic stressors outside of the gym. And the other thing that challenges the ordinary minimize inflammation approach, because the modern research suggests that some degree of this very muscle damage and inflammatory response may be necessary for your maximal adaptation. And so the goal becomes just optimizing rather than minimizing inflammatory responses. Now we talk about genetics and how we're meant to work with your blueprint. Genetics determine approximately 50% of your muscle building potential, but they don't dictate your ceiling, they just influence the rate of progress you're going through. And the optimal training methods you should apply. First key genetic factor is the muscle fiber type distribution. You always knew these guys who can hit like 2-3 reps on the main compound exercises and still progress, but for someone it might be necessary to hit from 6 to 8 reps. Why is it so? The thing is that fast twitch dominant individuals typically respond better to the lower rep range and high intensity training, while slow twitch dominant individuals may benefit from higher volume approaches. There are some mutations in the myostatin, and some of these mutations can dramatically increase the muscle building capacities, but even common variants influence the response to training. Interestingly, there is a particular gene called the P gene, ACTN3, and it affects the fast twitch fiber function and power development capabilities. So almost all the athletes with this gene mutation are simply progressing quicker than ordinary people. Some people suggest that you should take genetic tests to determine how you should train, but basically they have very limited practical application. What you should really do is just use your own response patterns to guide your programming. Because if you simply respond better to high frequency and lower volume session, you might be slow twitch dominant. That's an obvious conclusion. And superior response to heavy lower volume train indicated your fast twitch dominance. And you should just adjust your rep ranges and train frequency to these very indicators, but optimize it all to your genetics for you. That's me just recording this. It also means adjusting your training based on your recovery capacity rather than the arbitrary programs. It's not always necessary to compare yourself to others. We live in an extremely digitally overwhelmed world, and sometimes it's just hard to concentrate on your own training until you have some other athletes are posting the reels and Instagram with new PR every single train. Well, you can simply do so. Simply focus on maximizing your own genetic potential rather than comparing to others, because you are all different, and consider that your own disadvantages in some area can correlate with some proficiency or advantages in others. And we'll talk about supplements and how can you cut through all the noise around the topic. The supplement industry thrives on complexity and novelty, but research cases cite only a few compounds with meaningful muscle building effects. And when 250 plus supplements examined in meta-analysis, only creatine and H1B showed consistent evidence for enhancing muscle growth. Creatine is a gold standard supplement with the strongest evidence base. Research shows from 8 to 15% increase in strength and 5 to 10% increase in muscle mass when combined with resistance training. The mechanism of its action involves the ATP regeneration during high-intensity exercise allowed for greater training volume and intensity. So basically, you just have more of the reserve in the muscles and you recover quicker with fat sets. Optimal creatine protocol is from 3 to 5 grams per day without any loading phases. The timing is pretty relevant, and the form we should use is basically the creatine monohydrate because it's the cheapest and most researched. For continuous use without any pauses, it will show the best effect for yourself. And what about the pre-workout supplements? Mixed evidence for mood ingredient formulas, but for caffeine, it shows consistent benefits for acute performance. While it may benefit muscular endurance in 1 4-minute duration activities, but for longer training sessions, it's not simply so effective. Most other pre-workout ingredients simply have external evidence. What doesn't work at all is, despite market claims, the BCAA, when protein intake is adequate, glutamine, tree boost races, and most testosterone boosters. Considering whether you should take protein on a daily basis is only if your total daily protein intake is suboptimal, but any other food sources are equally effective. Now it's time to talk about the technique and what can we do behind the basics. Once you master fundamental training principles, advanced techniques can provide some additional stimulus for continued progress. There are some research on drop sets and rest pause methods that show extreme benefits when applied strategically. For drop sets, reduce the weight and continue the set. Studies show from 5 to 10 greater muscle activation and modest hypertrophy benefits to the straight sets. But we'll consider it's the best to apply at the final sets of isolation exercises to avoid the excessive system fatigue. Cluster sets are continuing the set in an interval from 15 to 30 seconds after the last rep, allowing partial recovery. It's particularly effective for strength-focused session, the compound exercises, and just train with a higher load. There's also a method called rest pause training, meaning that you do a brief pause after the initial train and continue for additional reps. Studies show approximately similar hypertrophy effects to traditional methods, but the reduced time investment is pretty effective for breaking plateaus or just increasing your training density. Curiously, the pre-exhaustion isn't as effective as it seems. Basically, we consider it as doing some isolation exercise before the compound movement, but the research shows mixed results, meaning that it can have some potential benefits for targeting the specific muscle groups, but it impairs the compound movement performance, so you basically won't have as good chance to get a higher load of your exercise you're aiming at. So you can use it selectively for working muscle groups, but if you want to progress in a compound exercises, just let it go. Now we've come to the stone, the plateau, and have to break it. What to do when you progress stops. Plateaus are inevitable in strength training, but they're also predictable and you can manage it. There is some volume manipulation trick. Studies show that after your strength plateau occurs, temporarily increase your volume up to 20-30% for 2 to 4 weeks can restart your progress. If you're training mainly like a powerlifting mode, it means that you should just simply reduce the compound load and increase the accessory load for a brief period of time and do it bodybuilding mode, as you could call it, and eventually it will work for you. This way, I'd also recommend to alternate somehow between the higher and lower intensity phases to allow for recovery while maintaining the proper training stimulus. But it's also shown that the exercise variation every 4-6 weeks can improve your strength gains compared to the constant exercise selection. And don't forget to rest properly, because the planned reduction in training volume and intensity allows you for super compensation later on. Research suggests that it's a proper way to do it every 4-6 weeks to allow you for long-term progress and preventing the overreaching. Also, your mind basically 2 minutes at a time, and that's the technical refinement. It's often overlooked, but it's very crucial. Studies show that simply improving your movement efficiency can increase the strength without muscle growth, simply breaking through neural adaptations. Focus on fueling the machine. What's about the nutrition? Training provides the stimulus, but your food supplies the body materials. Research consistently shows that protein intake from 1 to 1 per pound of body weight optimizes muscle protein synthesis, and you should combine it with resistance training. The protein time and miss in the field and anabolic windows aren't true at all, and they've been largely debunked by the recent research. Studies show that total daily protein intake matters far more than the precise timing, and the effective windows actually exceeds 4-6 hours around training. Just focus on consistent daily intake rather than post-workout urgency. Adequate carbohydrates, though not directly related to the muscle building, support the training performance and recovery. Research suggests that from 2 to 3 grams per pound body weight for intensive training phases works extremely well, and the lower amounts are acceptable during maintenance periods. Fat intake is often overlooked but very essential for the hormone production as well. So studies show that very low-fat diets, like 0.2 per pound body weight, can impair testosterone production and muscle growth. Now we should debunk some myth. The popular training culture is built on them, and it often wastes a lot of time and energy. Let's start from muscle confusion. Research shows that random variation makes the adaptation a bit worse, and progressive overload with consistent movement patterns can give you much more superior results than any constant exercise change. Basically, you can change your once per 4-6 weeks, but to do it more often, it simply means engaging yourself with some unnecessary activities. Anabolic window is also a myth, because studies demonstrate that protein synthesis remains elevated for 4-6 hours post-exercise, and the total daily protein intake just trumps any timings. In body recomposition industry, we often hear about muscle turning into fat, but it's just physiologically impossible. I'm not really sure if I should mention it. These are completely different tissue types, and they cannot interconvert. Also, we often hear about muscle toning, and it's also a marketing myth, because it simply means the muscle growth combined with fat loss. There's no physiological difference between toning and building muscles. And also, sport reduction exercises, like doing some flies to make the fat on your shoulders go less. But the research consistently shows that the targeted exercises cannot reduce any fat in specific body regions. Your fat loss occurs systematically in the whole body, despite any section you're working in. It's not local for this section. And how do you integrate this all into your own training protocol and put all the science into practice? A effective training system should integrate every scientific principle into a coherent, progressive system. Here's how the research translates to the practical application. The program structure foundation is from 3 to 4 training sessions per week for beginners, 4-6 for intermediate advanced athletes, and 2-3 sessions per muscle group weekly. The 50-70 compound movements, 30-50 for isolation work. The volume and intensity guideline is from 12 to 20 plus sets per muscle group, adjust to your own recovery, and train within 2-3 reps to failure on most sets. The progressive overload should fall on every 1-2 weeks, and as we mentioned, it can be improved not only by increasing the weight on the bar, but as well by improving your own technique and the number of sets per. And there's also a proper deload required every 4-6 weeks. Your recovery optimization would conclude in from 7 to 9 hours sleep nightly, from 48 to 72 hours between early intense sessions for same muscle groups, and simply managing life stress, because it impacts your recovery significantly. You should also monitor and respond to other recovery indicators like bad mood or post-training fatigue, some other kind of usual. Fuel yourself with good food and good supplements. For creatine is from 3 to 5 grams daily without interruptions. For caffeine is from 200 to 40 milligram per workout if your tolerance allows. And the adequate protein is from 0.8 to 5.3 per pound of your body weight. Everything else is optional. The most successful athletes doesn't follow tradition, they simply follow evidence. This requires a fundamental massive shift from what everybody else does to what research demonstrates. It means questioning common methods, testing the hypotheses with your own training, and adjusting them based on the outcome you get. Research shows that it's not a dogma. The muscle growth operates through pretty predictable, quantifiable mechanisms. Your muscles doesn't care about gym culture, social media, or what worked for someone else. It responds to mechanical attention, progressive overload, and adequate recovery, on a way with consistent application and evidence-based principles. And what we're talking about today isn't about reaching some kind of perfection in training, but about the precision and regularity, because small regular improvements in multiple areas will compound into a dramatic long-term differences for you. If you optimize your training methods constantly, you would always outperform the one who are following some traditions regardless of genetics, age, or the performance. If you hear you're already doing a good job, you're optimizing your workouts based on research, and you will always outperform the one who simply following some traditions or doesn't take into regard genetics, age, or starting points. Your physique is not a thing that it's giving you by default. It's a cumulative result of thousands of training decisions. And right now you're making this difference, not based on methodology, but based on science. You will see the progress. So the research has already done the work, and your job is simply to apply it constantly and measure the results. The top one, understand this. Now you do too. I tried my best for this video. Hope it helps you. If you like the content, subscribe, and if you want to coach you, there's a nice link right up in the profile. Hope you enjoy your day. See you soon.